Hi, everyone. Kristin Thomas. This is Supconnect Live. It's our Thursday interview with interesting people in the stand-up paddle world, and you won't be disappointed today. I've already learned a lot in just catching up with Zac Kauffman of Sawyer Paddles, who we're going to be talking to. It's from Southern Oregon. The company is also based there, and a sup paddler himself, of course, but really interesting discussion about whitewater and rivers and paddling from that angle, and paddles themselves. So I think you will learn a lot. So my question for you, see if you know this, they do have a whitewater specific stand-up paddle sup series of paddles that were based on a pro river sup paddler. So do you know who that paddler is? We're going to tell you in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to find Zac and have him join us. Hit the wrong button. Let's see. I know you're in here somewhere. There we go. Right at the top. Fantastic. Haha. Somebody answered already. How you doing,
Hey,
Zac?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. How are you
Great.
doing?
Great to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's
Yeah,
beautiful
very
here
happy
in
to be here.
California. How is it in Oregon?
We're pretty much having a typical summer day. You know, it's probably hit the low 90s, high 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and looks like we're going to be in some mid 90s over the weekend, which will be nice. So
We had
yeah,
a,
it's been
a little
been
bit of
good.
fog this morning, so I guess that's fairly typical, although it's supposed to be June gloom, not July. But let's
Right.
jump right into you, because there's lots to talk about. How
Absolutely.
did you get started? What's your was there a water background before stand-up paddleboarding? We're going to talk about, of course, Sawyer Paddles. You're the CEO, and I know you've been with them for 8 years. But how about you? How did you get started, and what really hooked you on stand-up paddling?
Well, myself and pretty much all of our sales staff at Sawyer have always been known as a company that sells the product but also uses the product. And so myself and a lot of our sales team, I've got about 25 years of commercial guiding under my belt, and so commercial guiding of whitewater and drift boat fishing, and of course living here in the Rogue Valley, just tons of river opportunity. And so I basically started doing that in college, and one thing led to another, and just kind of kept me in it. And then of course, being in the outfitting industry, we had this sup thing that was basically starting off, and we were seeing that it was mostly in oceans and lakes, and then a couple buddies of mine are like, hey, we're thinking about taking these on the river. And my very first board I bought from an outfitter buddy, and it was because he took his fiberglass board on the river and just practically destroyed it,
Yeah.
because he's just banging into rocks and everything. And the thing, I still have it today. It's fairly waterlogged. It's my loaner board that I let anybody use. But and that was kind of the beginning. And then I started researching into, well, for the river application, we need something that's a little more durable. And so, I looked into various companies for inflatable boards, and we started with an inflatable board and also a couple hard boards at a lodge I was working at. And then just kind of that was while I was still in outfitting, and
Hmm.
then my transition kind of happened from being a Sawyer customer to being a Sawyer employee. And so in the Rogue Valley, if you're in outfitting, pretty much you know that you could go to the factory and get your set of oars or paddles that you need and get them straight from the source. And so I always had just kind of taken the time when I went over to the factory to talk with the owners there, and got to know them fairly well. And at that point, that was only the second ownership of Sawyer. And if you spend some time talking with Bruce when he was there, it was like they would give you some product to check out. hey, we're trying out this oar, why don't you run it for a while and see how that works. And so I basically just developed that relationship with Bruce, and then when the initial change of ownership happened from Bruce to Pete, that came about, and my name was kind of in the mix, and so then it basically made it much easier to really pursue SUP quite a bit more, because then not only did I have this interest personally, but then I also had this interest professionally, and so then I started working with all these accounts that Sawyer had through the SUP angles, and kind of see like what Sawyer was bringing to the table, and what the other competitors were bringing, and what were all the applications. And that was still, even back then, even back 8-9 years ago, it was still fairly new.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was like, I remember having a discussion with one of the board manufacturers that we had done quite a bit of collaborated work with, and they were talking about how they're just like, how did you guys at OR, how do you have that position in OR when you're in the hall and right on the walkway? And I'm like, well, I mean, we've been coming to that show for 16 years, and they're just like, oh, we feel like we're just such a baby. We just feel so young. And I'm like, it's not your company, it's the whole industry. It's
yeah.
Very new.
And we've had many discussions about how it's still very young, but you were in it very early. So you had tried it even before you joined Sawyer in 2011. You had been an active paddler. Well, that's really early. So the growth has just been crazy and exponential and kind of all over. And I feel like we're still getting organized. That's why it's so fantastic to talk to you. I mean, we've talked to people sort of from the like flatwater inland side, from the ocean and surfing side, but you come more from that river and whitewater, but also from the whole rafting and adventure part. I want to talk more about that, but finish up with kind of your journey then with Sawyer. So 8 years from sales rep to CEO.
So the journey with Sawyer was basically when I was obviously full, just knee deep in outfitting when the opportunity came about, and there was a short list of folks that were going through that interview process, and I met with the ownership, and at the point, I was in the middle of the season, and I mean, it was like I was discussing with them on my day off, and they were kind of like, all right, well, can you come in tomorrow and we'll do a working interview and see if we can kick this off? And I'm kind of like, well, I'm interested, but I can't really do that. I mean, there's 22 people that are going to be on the side of the river tomorrow, and if I'm not there, that's not going to work. And so I basically it made me do some deep thinking, and I was in the process of actually working on a purchase of the company I was working with at that time, and so basically I was like, well, we'll keep in touch, but I gotta finish out this season, I gotta see how things are working with the outfitting, and so I basically went back to that outfit and kind of pushed and pursued on if there was going to actually be a sale to myself and a collaborated group of folks, and kind of lo and behold, that just kind of all fell apart, and I was kind of like, okay,
meant to be, maybe. Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't hang a lot of hope on that, and so within a few weeks, I had pretty much closed that door, and the door at Sawyer pretty much had closed. I mean, they said, well, we need somebody right now, we're going to hire somebody, but let's keep in communication. So we did keep in communication, and when things closed up with the outfitting in a few weeks, I basically just had some gear that I had borrowed from Sawyer, because that's just kind of the way the company was, and I took all that equipment, brought it back to Sawyer and returned it, and the old owner was there, and I just returned the stuff and told him that, for that lodge, I'm not your contact anymore. Here's the new contact, and here's the gear that I borrowed for this busy weekend that we had, and let me know if you need anything else. And they were very busy, right? And the owner kind of runs through the office space and then comes back through on his way to something else and be like, hey, just give me 1 second. I'll be right back. I need to talk to you. And I'm like, okay. So I turn in the gear and I'm talking with the front office guys there and telling them, about some different oars and stuff. And the old owner comes out. He's like, you got a minute? And I'm like, well, yeah, actually I do. And so we went outside and I talked with him for about 45 minutes and told him what was going on. And he's like, well, your timing's just right because, we did hire somebody, but it didn't work out. And that position is open and you'd be perfect for it. And within half hour, I talked to the new owner and, it was basically one of those where, hey, I'm going on a river trip. So am I. I'm going on a river trip. It's like, all right, well, when you get back next week, let's talk. And it all began.
Great.
And so basically, they kind of knew that my hopes was to own an outfitting company and be part of owner. And so as I started launching into Sawyer, they pretty much worked on ways that I could get some ownership of that company. And then basically as we grew throughout the years and went through our own ups and downs and turmoils, we basically had a group of partners that had vested interest in the company. And one of the partners that had a majority of the shares was, we were just kind of growing apart, partnerships with multiple people. And so we basically sat down and kind of said, how do we change this? What can we do to make this, change into something that is everybody's moving in the same direction? And we came to an agreement on just buying out the one partner, and then we have 3 partners, but those 3 partners, the whole idea is that everything's equal. So we all have, 1/3 of the company, and I'm the only one that's actually in the sales and marketing and administrative side of things. So I wear multiple hats, and the other 2 partners are actually in the manufacturing process as well. So literally anything purchased from Sawyer, there's a good chance that at least 1 or 2 of the owners had their hands in it while it was being made.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the direction we were working on with the partnership, is that, it's very different when you have people that have ownership of the company in that actual manufacturing process. Kind of having the skin in the game it was very important to us. And we've just kind of taken it to the next level. And so, I don't go out in the shop and build many things, and they don't come and try and do what I do.
You handle that sales and marketing
exactly.
side.
they jokingly like to call me the secretary. So that's one of the many hats. One of the many hats I wear.
One of the many hats. Well, that's always the most important person in a company, right? So maybe that's not derogatory.
Yeah. But
well, I do. We'll kind of go back and forth between all, because I've gotten so much information and interesting stuff from you already. But I think rafting trips, that adventure is one of, to me, the optimal of being outside and nature and active, but having, the companies usually make your dinner or set up your tent and that kind of thing. But you had a really interesting observation. I haven't been on one in a long time, and certainly kayaks were part of that. You were in the raft, but then you might get out and do a float or in an individual, but you had something interesting to say about SUP, and that has changed a little bit.
Right. Well, I've always kept my ties to all of my outfitter buddies. Some of them are just long-term friends that I've had for years. And just because I've changed jobs and I'm not an outfitter with them, there's still a lot of them buy stuff from us. Outfitters are this huge part of our base. And so one of the things that was starting to happen is that, there's outfitters want to be able to offer the latest and greatest thing, what's the newest trend. And so with a lot of multi-days, a lot of times you have inflatable kayaks that are brought along, and that gives a person a chance to go out and paddle their own craft and actually, have some independence, but they've got a lead boat in front of them and a couple of boats behind them. And so they're kind of corralled in. And then, sometimes some of the companies actually have somebody in the water with them, that's guiding them along. But, the inflatable kayak aspect is kind of always something that's there. And like the last company that I worked at, I mean, on a trip where we had 22 people, there would be, 6 to 8 kayaks on the water. And, you would just kind of, every time you went into a rapid area, you would kind of line them all up and give them their rundown. And so the inflatable SUPs kind of had got to that point where they just started progressing, getting better and better and better. It's like what we were talking about where, the inflatable SUP boards, so many of the manufacturers now are really getting a really dynamite board that is very, very good performance-wise for paddling, and it gives that element for the person that doesn't have any storage because they can pump the thing up to 16 psi and go tour on the lake, and they have really good performance. But that same element really helped out just the stability of having a board made for whitewater. And so an outfitter is looking at purchasing some new kayaks, and they've had that interest of getting something new. They could literally purchase a few inflatable SUP boards and have that to offer along. And the whole concept is to really get away from the fact that you have to be standing up, right? Like the whole idea is that you're going to navigate the rapids and the current, and standing up through everything, that's just a bonus. But a board will still perform quite well if you're kneeling on it, sitting on it, laying on it. It's still going to be a floatable craft, right? So in that element, if you put the multiple different ways that you can actually be on it, it basically turns it into, it can fully be that aspect of an inflatable kayak if it needs to be.
Well, I think that's so interesting because I always call it the most versatile watercraft, but I'm thinking more in terms of that it can be taken on any kind of water, but it can also be used as a tool or whatever, as a craft in so many different ways. So that's a very interesting thought about the flexibility.
Everybody's seen the goofy photos of the guy sitting on the lawn chair surfing on a wave, right? So like if you take that concept and kind of go, oh well, actually it doesn't really matter how I'm on the board, that I can actually use it and it's going to be able to navigate through whitewater. And
are you having fun? The most
exactly. And the other thing is that it really makes it so you can challenge yourself on smaller class water with a SUP board, right? So you may be in a kayak and paddle through class 2-3 whitewater, and that's exciting, but not that big. And then you can be on a SUP and you can actually paddle class 1-2 whitewater, and eddy lines can be exciting. Because you're not really connected into it. You're basically just bracing and angling with your body. And so it makes it so you can really explore water that maybe would be kind of really mellow water in some crafts, but if you're standing up, it's actually quite challenging.
Well, and I think that's exciting for people who maybe are listening who've never tried whitewater. Maybe that was something that sort of seemed too hard or not on their list, but the idea that, I could do it the first time sitting down, and then when I'm ready or if I want to, I can choose to stand up. I think that's a great point.
We actually do a weekly paddle at our retail shop, and still to this day we are introducing people to the sport, and it's very common for them to, when we start questioning them, is like, yes, I've paddleboarded before. I was on vacation in Hawaii, or I was on vacation here, and I did it for an afternoon. But they don't own one, and that was like the only time they've paddled. And now they live in the Rogue Valley, and they've got this gorgeous river that runs right through the valley, and they're kind of like, so I'm interested, but how do I do that? And so there's sections that we can go to where you get people out. Once you also, first thing is you get them out on an inflatable, and they're sitting there on the side of their river, and they're pounding on the thing, and they're just like, this is inflatable? And like, because they can't even believe it that it's inflatable when you pump those things up to 16, 17 psi. I mean,
the good boards can handle a high psi, and they're so much better, like you said, than they were 10 years ago.
So they've made a big difference. And so then you get them out there and talk a little bit about fins and everything, but basically get them out on the water, and even just nervous eddy and some moving current, and it makes it so they're kind of like, oh, okay, let's kind of start paddling, and you start where it's fairly flat, and they can kind of get the hang of it to where it's like, oh yeah, this is kind of like I remember. But then if there's a reverse current eddy that actually takes them back up, and then you takes them into some actual current, it's really where they just start to get this whole sense of like, wow, this is like a whole little playground. And we're typically only out paddling for about an hour, hour and a half, and every time we do it, we'll see first timers that have maybe paddleboarded once on the lake or on the ocean, and they're completely nervous of the whole event when they get on the board. And before the end, they're paddling upstream, up in an eddy, peeling out into current. Half the time they fall off when they peel out. Half the time they make it, and they're just so excited because they've been able to actually play with the current. And that's the thing. And there's a lot of what we call park and play spots on the Rogue River. Like a lot of areas around the country have park and play, like whitewater parks. And that's a whole nother element of SUP. But here in the Rogue Valley, we don't necessarily have that, right? We don't have a whitewater park. We don't have a man-made feature in the river. There's some folks that are trying to put something like that together, but really, so you're kind of forced to explore and utilize the natural river as your little playground. And there are several spots where you don't need to run a shuttle. Like you can literally drive to the river, put all your gear on, get on the water, paddle upstream and downstream, and utilize some part of a rapid. And after you do that for an hour and a half or so, you've gotten a good workout in. And that's also where there's not any powerboat influence. That was one of the things that really drew me to starting to explore the river. Besides the fact that I had all this experience with the river, so I felt very comfortable on the river. But some of our local lakes are very crowded, and part of the crowding on a local lake are powerboats and jet skis and all this motorized craft that I really don't want to spend time with. So I would seek out the river, and there's not a motorized craft of any on the river. And so you're kind of like, oh, this is kind of nice, And so a lot of times, there's people that can just drive to the river, and they'll sit there and hang out and, have their lunch or whatever. But
powered by humans and Mother Nature. I do love those types of watercraft. So, nothing against the motorized. But along the same lines about river, and again, I think for myself and other listeners that haven't done the river, in terms of your paddles, you mentioned that they're built differently because your focus is on river and whitewater paddling and paddles and oars. But the SUP, there's some differences. And
absolutely.
It's fantastic that I have to mention, your paddles are made in the USA. There's a couple paddle companies, nothing against the majority of our equipment, which is made overseas, but that's, I think a lot of people would want to know that, and they can visit Oregon and visit your shop and go paddle with you. And that's a wonderful story. But what about the paddles themselves made for SUP River?
So basically, when you look at a paddle for just getting out and aerobicizing and paddle cadence on the flat water, you need the bend, you need the offset to actually increase your paddle stroke. And so, for the fact that you have the 11-degree bend out there, you're going to get much more of a paddle stroke. And it's really all about getting an efficient paddle stroke, right? Well, when you're running down the river, you're not really trying to get an efficient aerobicized paddle stroke. Your paddle strokes are short, choppy paddle strokes, and you have to approach the river like a kayaker. And so really, whitewater SUP has more similarities to whitewater kayakers. And so a lot of what you're doing is bracing and, high brace, low brace. And so to do that, you want a positive brace. So you don't want any offset at all. You want the blade to be straight so that when you lean on it, it's actually going to give you a full support rather than actually having an offset where you have to lean extra far on it. And then also we worked on a collaboration with Paul Clark, who
Alex Maurer was on here, and he knew that answer immediately. So that was the
Oh
answer
yes,
to the
of
question
course,
at the
of
beginning.
course.
Paul Clark.
So Paul Clark came to us, and we've known Paul for quite a while, just because he's also affiliated with Hala, and we carry their boards, but also he had come through the area, and some of their ambassadors lived here locally, and so we got to know Paul through mutual friends and through the industry itself, and he kind of spent a year or two where he spent a lot of focus on the kind of the Pacific Northwest, and he was not fully sold on Sawyer before he did that, but when he did that, it was one of the things that he didn't realize is like he was in our backyard. He literally was in Sawyer land, and all these rivers that he went on, it was like he didn't see a bunch of people on sup boards with Sawyer paddles, but all of the rafters had Sawyer oars, and whitewater paddlers had Sawyer whitewater paddles, and he is just kind of like, this is Sawyer, like you guys are the river. And some of our competitors in the sup paddle business is they would be like, you guys are whitewater, like kind of almost saying like, don't mess with the flat water, you guys are really whitewater. And it was like, well, yeah, we understand that whitewater is kind of this niche. And so when Paul came to us, it was like a perfect example of just kind of like, this is something we've been wanting to do, and now we have someone who really has that passion on it. And so when we launched into the collaboration with Paul, it was one of those things is that instantly he realized that when he could come to the factory, and he had already been to the factory a few different times just traveling through, but when he came to the factory and was able to actually meet with the shop foreman, who is actually one of the owners, and explain what he wants to be designing, and literally we would, like, him and I would sit down and draw stuff out, and then once we got to a point, I'd be like, okay, hold that thought and let me go get Israel and you can explain it to him. And so Paul would explain it, and it was one of those things is where he's like, all right, is that all we need? I'm like, you explain it to Israel, he knows what you want, just go ahead and take off, come back in a couple weeks, and we'll have the first prototype. And so we did that process a couple times, and it kind of got to where he really, you could tell that it was very enjoyable on his side as well as our side to be able to just give him that time, and we weren't pressured. Like we had all the time in the world. It wasn't like we put a deadline on it, right? We just basically said, hey, let's get this done. We're going to do a couple prototypes and we'll figure it out. And we definitely tweaked a few things along the way, but yeah, all in all, the way it came out is that the paddle blade is designed, one, with not having the offset, but also it is very quintessential Sawyer. So part of it is that it's all laminated Western red cedar, so it has that beautiful wood look. And then we basically beefed it up similar to what a rafting guide paddle would be. And then we basically we went a little overboard at one point. It was too heavy. And so, we kind of went back and forth, fine-tuning, trying to find that happy mix. And then in turn, the blade is quite long. It's narrow in the front and broad in the shoulders. So you can put a little bit of the blade in if you just need a little adjustment stroke or a little brace, or you can plunge the whole blade in if you need a full power stroke. And so it's kind of like you have the ability to also kind of gauge how much pull you're going to get. And
yeah.
And in the rivers is also, Paul actually has a whole SUP 101 river clinic that he does, and all of our guys at our store have taken it with Paul a couple times, and we kind of teach that type of program. But a lot of it is like where you start thinking about you're going to run a lower stance where you're really absorbing a lot in your knees. You're really getting your butt down to your heels to be that shock absorber, and in turn you're paddling with a shorter paddle. Mm-hmm. And you can actually make paddle strokes where you're not switching hands. Where most SUP paddlers are just like, I'm do X amount of strokes on this side, and I switch X amount of strokes on this side, and that transition switch, right, is very crucial. Where now if you take it into a different mindset, it's like, I'm not going to switch my hands. I'm going to stay on a strong side or a weak side, and the strong side that's similar to kayaking where you have a strong side or a weak side. And the strong side is kind of your go-to, but then you literally can take it across your toes and do a quick stroke on that weak side and come back to your strong side as your, more of your platform. And so, yeah, it's kind of a whole different way of thinking about it, but it has a lot of similarities to whitewater kayaking.
Yeah.
And like also here in the Northwest, Dan Gavir was a whitewater kayaker, now is, just full into SUP, and and he has his own signature board as well, and and it's just one of those things where it's kind of like, it's almost like if you've got to this plateau on kayaking, SUP, you don't forget how to read the river, but now you have to ride it differently, and the gentleman behind my shoulder there, Kobe Bach, he's actually an ambassador of ours and an ambassador of Hala's, and a longtime whitewater kayaker. Like, whitewater kayakers are very similar crossovers to whitewater SUP, and then a lot of our ambassadors that have that river aspect.
Yeah.
Well,
it is interesting, and it makes perfect sense that it would be a lot of kayakers that would end up being your ambassadors in whitewater. But it was fun. I think I mentioned to you, I've been able to do a little bit of whitewater. Unfortunately, in Southern California, our closest whitewater is not very close. It's in Central California, Kern. But there was an amazing event in Idaho for a few years, the Payette River Games, and that brought such an interesting. They actually had kayak events too. So we had Nick Troutman and the Jacksons and like people who are really well known in the kayak world. And there was such an interesting crossover. And it was interesting, those of us who are newer, the terminology just was so different. I do want to say though, I was such a focused regular paddler, just what you said about just changing hands. Bracing is essential to any type of stand-up paddleboarding. Surfing, just surfing this morning. Absolutely. Getting over the waves, you brace. Turning, you brace. Racing, we brace a lot too, especially if you're doing anything in choppy waters. Bracing is essential, and I didn't get that at first. I only used my paddle for forward propulsion. But so interesting, and with all the little different nuances of the river. Well, it's more than nuances. I mean, there's really different strokes. J strokes.
Yeah, and I think I think that's a lot like the Payette Games was what was very evident is just the full athleticism of the Kais and the Mo Freitas, and the folks that were very dominating in the ocean basically just converted their mindset to be like, okay, it's kind of like taking on a rapid is like, it's just, you're in the break the entire time, right? And so like that whole thing of just really came about where when they're racing, race boards on the whitewater is like, it's just that's a whole other element.
Yeah.
But it did really open up some folks to that sport, and like we were talking earlier, I mean, just it's too bad that wasn't able to continue, because it was an incredible crossover.
Yeah. Where
just, I mean, all of the folks that are still very dominating in just the ocean racing, they showed up there in Idaho and were pretty impressive as far as just the way they were able to navigate. And
that was an amazing experience. But there's a whitewater SUP culture out there. I know it's really strong in Colorado. I feel it's like a little bit disconnected. That one was particularly reached out all over the world, and people came from other countries to do that.
Right.
But it's still strong, and it's so neat to hear. I love the whole idea that if you haven't tried whitewater, if you haven't been on a river, don't be intimidated. There's ways to do it, and you just really kind of highlighted that. I don't know. I meant to ask you you don't happen to have a paddle right there. I mean, one of the things you mentioned wood, but one of the things you do well, even though you have full carbon paddles, is you also make some gorgeous wood paddles, the kind I would want to hang on my wall.
Right. I did not bring a paddle, but
it's only Instagram. I know. We'll have to put a picture in the follow-up on the Facebook group.
Exactly. I mean, I can send you some links of that. The Super Stick is the collaborated paddle with Paul Clark, so it would be good to put that link up in the Facebook chat. But but yeah, so basically, you know, a lot of what is once again quintessential Sawyer is the lamination of the Western red cedars, the ponderosa pine, the Douglas fir, and really the Western red cedar is so iconic. And just because you get a lot of those deep reds and kind of tans, and you know, so like you can get an entire unit of cedar and you have a full variety of color in that unit. And so, you know, that's something that the guys, when they're laying up our paddles, you know, they literally have a menu where they're just like literally grabbing the menu and making sure that you have all kinds of different contrasting colors in the laminate. And you know, a lot of folks don't understand that a paddle blade is actually built as a block, right? So that when they're actually making the menu, as far as the mix that the laminate's going to be, they put that all together, and I mean it's a laminate that's a big block, you know. I mean it's literally, you know, bigger than a countertop, and you make that big block, and then once that is glued up, then you're basically slabbing off that like you were slabbing off a roast or something. And once you have that different thickness, then that's what goes to the shapers or the carvers. And we refer to it all the time as like a couple of the main guys that really do all the shaping and all the paddles and all the shaping and all the oars, is we try to refer to them as shapers, like someone who would be shaping a surfboard, because a lot of it is shaped by hand. I mean, literally shaped by hand, and a lot of it is shaped by sanding. And so
both an art and a science. I agree.
Absolutely,
Paddles or boards. Yeah.
And it's one of those things is that you know, the quintessential Sawyer customer understands the craftsmanship, and that it is a handmade product. You know, we don't really have a machine that's just kicking out blades or oars or paddles at all. You know, every one of them has a full process that they go through, and there's many hands touch every product. Sometimes we would be hindered by the fact that too many hands touch the product, but that is the way that the business is, and that goes right back to our founder, Ralph Sawyer. You know, I mean, that was what his canoe paddles were. Is like, if you look at canoe paddles, if we have, it's constant, like every week somebody will send us a photo of a paddle that most of the time they found at a garage sale.
Oh, and
Ralph used to put his name on the logo.
Wow.
And so they would tell us, you know, I have this Ralph Sawyer paddle, and they'd send us a picture, and they're like, you know, what year and how much is it worth? And it's like, well, yeah, it's only worth what someone will pay you for it, but we have a bunch of those ourselves, so no, we're not really, we don't need to buy a bunch of those back, or we have plenty of historic paddles, but
they are still special, and how cool that he his signature. Maybe somewhere down the line at Antiques Roadshow, it is going to be suddenly a huge value. You never know.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, I literally have discussions with people, and I just have to tell them, is like, it may be a beautiful work of art, but it's still a beautiful functional tool, and you need to take it off the wall and put it in the water.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's made to be used, and that's a lot of what our stuff is it's a beautiful functional tool. And so, like, you know, the cedars are much lighter weight, so that you can really get those features that are very similar to a high performance carbon paddle, but you still have that full wood aspect to it. And so yeah, the Western red cedar is really kind of one of our higher end, you know, and that's in most of our higher end paddles across the board. You know,
that's neat stuff. That you have a signature wood. Well, back to kind of paddles in general. Maybe you could give us in terms of my purchasing a paddle, like a few mistakes to be avoided in looking for paddles.
Well, there's a couple that really come to mind, and probably the biggest thing is that people spend a lot of time focusing on the board they're going to buy, and they spend a lot of time focusing on the boat they're going to buy. And then this deal's all done, and they spend a fraction of time on choosing the paddle and what is really going to send them and give them propulsion, right? So probably the biggest thing is that try and spend as much time in choosing on a paddle as choosing on the board.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times the customer will be sold on the board, and then the board is just sold on a package, and they take that package paddle with it just because it's a package, right? But what a lot of people don't realize is that you don't need to take that paddle, and that's your primary negotiating point, because that's the time that you want to upgrade your paddle, is when that paddle that they want to include is new. Because as soon as you take the whole package and you go out the door with it,
it's not new anymore.
You no longer have a trading chip, right?
That's an excellent tip, because I'm so with you that paddles are essential on so many reasons. I mean, just enjoyment, but also just the physicality of, what you're going to do to your shoulders, and if you don't have the right paddle in terms of length, shape, size.
Yeah. And so that's probably the first thing. And then the other thing is that, now with the way that there are so many very good adjustable paddles, it's like, until you fully know what you're going to be doing, you don't need to get a fixed grip paddle. Most packages are coming with an adjustable anyhow now, but like when we sell boards, we're pretty much selling somebody an inflatable board that, first off, right out of the gate, they're going to be like, yes, I'm going to use it on the river. Yes, I'm going to use it on the lake. And yeah, I might paddle it on the ocean every once in a while. So right there, they've already told you there are 3 completely different usages. And it's kind of like, okay, well, until you really know where your main focus is, if you go with an adjustable paddle, then you're going to find that sweet spot. And you may find that you always are going to be in that shorter stance because you spend most of your time on the river. And then we really tell people, like, we try to narrow it down. And one of the things that we constantly tell people with paddles, oars, no matter what it is that you need to buy to what you use over 50% of the time. So if you find that over 50% of the time you're typically on a river and you're typically running through smaller rapids, then yes, you need a shorter paddle. It will work if you're on the lake, but you might as well get a paddle that actually is made for what you're doing the most of. And that's typically a good way to go. And then once they really kind of figure out what they like and dislike, really at that next level, when you're ready to actually get, this is my paddle. This is not the paddle I'm going to share with anybody. And that's the other thing. In the beginning, there's a lot of sharing. That's a beautiful thing about the sport, right? Is that most people are introduced to the sport by a friend that basically was out at a lake or the ocean or the cabin somewhere, and it'd be like, hey, you want to give this a try? And they're like, yeah, I've seen it, and but I've never really had the chance. And it's like, hey, here's the chance. We got 2 boards right down on the dock. Here's a paddle. Go at it, right? And so there is definitely a lot of sharing, and more and more of the sport, you have a lot of folks coming in. It's for the family or it's for the group of friends, and so adjustable paddles have really kind of become that's more of the full scope paddle. And then it's really, once that person gets to where it's just for me and it's just for this specific thing, then you're looking at really more of that's where the fixed grip, I think, really comes into play. And in turn, I mean, we sell way fewer fixed grip paddles than we do adjustable paddles. And in the Super Stick, we produce a lot of adjustable paddles for the shareable factor, because a shop will get them and they want people to try them out. But that's a spot where once you've really narrowed in that you're going to do whitewater, then you want to get a fixed grip paddle.
Yeah.
and you want to get one that's shorter and start embracing the fact that you're not having to switch hands. And my son actually does a lot of whitewater paddling, and he paddles with a guide stick, basically a whitewater rafting paddle, but he likes the blade geometry and he likes the height
How
of it.
short it is. Ooh.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so, it's just kind of one of those things. And we've had people that actually ask for our whitewater race paddles for raft racing and get them with an adjustable handle in it so that they can extend them out to where it's tall enough for them to whitewater sup with it. So there's a lot of crossover in sup,
Yeah.
and that's something
Absolutely.
that has become a very valuable thing for us to embrace because our line has so much diversity. We talked a little earlier the other day, basically like paddles is just a portion of our company. And all paddles are maybe 45% of our company. And then oars, all various oars are 55% of the company. And so in that half of the company or so, you're splitting that up between canoe, kayak, and sup.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of crossover in all of those paddles.
Yeah.
And so,
And well, we're glad that you
it.
have included SUP along the way. So you're in the Rogue River Valley, which is absolutely gorgeous, and there's water to paddle there. But have you personally or had a chance to paddle some other places? Any destination you really want to go to, or a favorite you've
I
been to?
definitely would like to explore other countries. I haven't really had the opportunity to paddle in other countries yet, but we definitely have folks that are ambassadors of ours and stuff that we've set them up, and they're take these grandiose travels around the world. And so really my travels have really been traveling to places to go surfing, because that is something that is very foreign to me. And so I've definitely taken my whole family to places that we can go surfing, and places down in Southern California and places over in Hawaii. And I do push that little element because I like that as well. But I haven't really got to really plan my sup adventure yet.
Yeah, well,
My
it's a
children have
strange time.
grown up and
Yeah,
now, and both of my children are one has graduated from college, and he's working at a professional job in Portland, but he is actually at our house now because their entire
yeah.
firm is working from home. And my other son is actually a senior in college, and he's taking school from home. So it's like everybody has
Right,
left the nest, but they're all back to
right.
roost.
So
So
I know it's a strange time with everything going
yeah,
on to be asking about travel, but we all are looking
yeah,
forward to the future. And just anecdotally, we've been talking to stores where people really are getting it through this, that they need to be outside, that they should be
right.
exercising, that their health is important. So
Oh yeah,
we're seeing that stand-up paddleboards, the shops are those that are able to open or to the ability that they can are really busy. So it's kind of
yeah,
an
and
I
actually,
think it's exciting for the future
yep.
of stand-up paddling and other outdoor
And that
activities.
ties right into what we have been finding as well, is that like right now, this is typically peak season for us anyhow, right? And right now it's peak season on steroids, because I think a lot of it is that people aren't taking the big vacation travels. So it's almost like forcing them to explore their backyard. And just the other day, we were talking with a dealer, and they do rentals of inflatable kayaks and stuff like that people will take and do multi-day raft trips. And they're saying that people are just coming and renting them and just going to the nearest water, nearest body of water, so they can just get out and paddle.
Hmm.
And I think that's the thing also with inflatable boards as well, and sup boards in general, is that yes, it's those that can actually fulfill are really going to benefit. And
Hmm.
right now, there's a lot of suppliers that just don't have product because containers are not moving from overseas, and
Yeah.
so yeah, it's
Yeah.
a heightened demand right now,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's a matter of pretty much, I think, all of the small craft stuff in a lot of our dealers shops, and ours included, will sell through before the end of the season, and then once it's done, it's done. Pretty much, those that have it will get out and use it, and those that won't, they'll have to be waiting. But I've looked at a couple ship dates for various things that we've looked to bring in, and I'm seeing them out in September already, and I'm like, okay, well, that's probably not going to happen. And it just kind of forces you to kind of move into something else. And I think we've been a recipient of that as well, because I think, folks are finding it harder to bring in all the elements. I mean, we're hearing from folks from paddle accounts that we haven't heard hardly anything from them for the last 3 years. And now in the last 3 weeks, they've ordered from us 4 times. And,
Wow.
and it's just kind of like they're like, almost like they're just kind of giddy when you tell them, yeah, we can get you that. And they're like, really?
What? You
And you're
can?
like, wait, like how soon? Like,
Yeah.
well, maybe 3 or 4 days. They're like, oh, 3 or 4 days is nothing. We were
Yeah.
thinking
Not
3 or 4
months.
months.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
You do?
exactly. And
That
so,
is very
I mean,
interesting.
I think that just being a U.S. manufacturer is having a little more clout right now, but because typically people don't necessarily buy with, I want to buy U.S. They basically they like that fact,
Mm-hmm.
but if there's a series of paddles there, they're not going to go, well, this one has that feature, that one, that feature, that feature. They're all very similar, but this one's made in the U.S., so I'm going to go there. There's definitely a fraction of that, but typically they're buying on performance and price. Like, hey, this is a high performance, and I like that price there. And so, I mean, it's never really been something that you can just banner made in USA.
But now with,
it's
yeah,
something you carry along. But now it's like made in USA may mean that it's actually made and
available.
available.
Yes. You
So
can
that's our new
actually get
thing
it
we're going
now.
to change, is available in USA.
Yeah. And available
But
here.
yeah, and it's one of those things, is that there's definitely raw materials that are getting
Mm-hmm.
harder to get for various things, but the fact that we have full control and everything is built under our roof here in Southern Oregon is definitely a benefit for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, before we wrap it up, maybe some tips. I mean, along the lines of what we just talked about, people are starting to stand up paddleboard. So any thoughts on how to get into stand up paddleboarding? Any recommendations?
Well, I would say that if there's a local shop or a rental outfit that is actually operating in your area, go participate in a rental or a demo, and spend a little time with your local shops. I would discourage people from just getting online fever and point and click and just order it all online. If there's an open shop near you, you should definitely go to that shop and glean some of their knowledge, and really do a little try before you buy. I mean, it's if that opportunity is there, you owe it to yourself to try before you buy.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's definitely some boards that I bought along the way that I really wished I would have paddled them more before I purchased them, but it was more impulsive, and there wasn't as much of that available. And now it seems like there are definitely opportunities to check stuff out and to try it out, and then just do your research. I mean, there's so much information out there. I mean, we all are forced to really have such a strong web presence, and the website is really, I mean, that's the dictionary on the company. I mean, that's the encyclopedia. You just you want to dig in there and find out what information you can on the boards, and we mostly focus on inflatables, but I've helped a few friends, and it's quite a broad scope when you start kind of looking at, on a hardboard that I have some stability on, but I don't want it to be too sluggish. And so, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think that definitely spending some time with a local shop is very, very beneficial. And we definitely try and do that anytime we can.
Yeah. Shop
But
small,
yeah,
shop local. I love that advice. Well, it's been
absolutely.
great talking with you. As you said, there might be more of us on road trips. So Sawyer Station is your flagship store in Southern Oregon,
Absolutely.
all in the Rogue Valley. I don't know if you do tours of your factory too or something, but you may have some visitors and
Right,
interested
right, right.
people. Yeah,
You're on the I-5 coming through.
there
Definitely
you
reach
go.
out to us.
Awesome.
We're right off
Well,
of I-5.
on behalf of Supconnect, I'm Kristin Thomas, Zac Kauffman from Sawyer Paddles and Oars. So great to have you. We do have a follow-up Facebook group, so we'd love you to sign in to Supconnect Live discussions, and we'll put links there to
Absolutely.
all everything that we talked about and some pictures too. So thanks
Sounds
for being
great.
with us
Sounds great.
today. Thank you, listeners. Appreciate it. These do get recorded and they
Excellent.
end up on Supconnect's YouTube channel. So if your friends didn't get to see it, send them that way.
All
Thanks a lot.
right.
And you
Thanks,
guys all have a
everybody.
great day. Bye.
Bye.